I'm going to introduce our panel in a bit more detail. So we have Professor Luciano Nardo from the Reproductive Health Group, who is a consultant gynecologist and subspecialist in reproductive medicine. There's a long list of things that Luciano specializes in, from infertility-assisted conception, endocrinology, pelvic pain, menstrual disorders, hysteropic management. Is that right? Hysteropic? I'll let him talk about it more. And Luciano is here to talk more about the things that you need to consider when it comes to tests and the different things that you need to be thinking about if you are considering fertility treatment. We also have Dr. Deborah Bloor from Care Fertility. And Deborah's worked in the IVF field for more than 20 years. She worked for 10 years at the University of Manchester doing research aimed at understanding the causes of infertility and improving fertility treatments. And again, Deborah will be talking about the different things to consider with your fertility when it comes to donor conception, surrogacy. We also have Jo McGrath. Jo is the director of Enterprise Limited. Jo does amazing work formulating strategy, generating income and building teams. She's the founder member of the Women Supporting Social Change. She's also a co-founder of Flourish, which is supporting women change makers. And that's how I met Mel with my work, met Jo in my work with the fertility podcast. Jo is mum to Freddie with her partner Jane, and is here to talk about her experience of having fertility treatment in a same-sex couple. And we have Rosie, who is part of Dr. Fertility. She's a fertility nutritionist to answer your questions about how to be as fit and ready as possible when it comes to fertility treatment. And so what I'm going to do is pass the mic around. Luciano, you're quite far away over there. Can I bring you closer in so that we can get questions? Because I want to start with you, Luciano, just talking a bit about if people are coming to a clinic to understand more about what might be involved when it comes to having treatment, men and women in same-sex relationships, the kind of things that they need to think about to be ready, tests that they might need, because whilst it's not necessarily an infertility issue, there might be fertility issues because there's not the experience of trying in the natural way that people try to have a family. So if you can just talk a bit about that.
Thank you, and thanks for inviting me tonight. It is very interesting when you have a same-sex couple, and it would be probably an easy approach to talk to them about fertility treatments. But as you've just said, it is possible, and on balance of probabilities, probably 25–30% of them will have an underlying fertility problem. And the fact they've not been exposed to the chance of pregnancy is something we have to bear in mind, and certain investigations have to be recommended in advance of starting the fertility or assisted conception journey. So in our clinic, and what we see happening is couples having fertility treatment and being in a same-sex relationship, often knowing that they have to have either a donor sperm or in some cases a surrogate mother to carry the pregnancy. But they haven't actually realized that they still need some investigations themselves if they want to use their gametes to conceive that pregnancy. So I don't think that we can advise any same-sex relationship to embark on fertility treatment without doing the standard investigation that we normally be doing in anybody. And these will go, depending on obviously on the circumstances, semen analysis, if the same-sex male relationship wanting to use the sperm, equally in women, same-sex relationship wanting to use their eggs, an AMH test, an ultrasound scan, and perhaps having that conversation whether what they initially thought was going to be the partner providing the eggs may not be the one actually that is in the best interest of the couple. As well as we've recently had a conversation about a couple wanting to use a specific partner within the relationship to carry the pregnancy. But actually we found out that she's got a uterine abnormality. So without doing that investigation, never been found out to have that uterine abnormality, possibly having a failed cycle or a number of miscarriages before finding out that she is not the best amongst the two to carry the pregnancy. So it is not just doing the investigations, but using the investigations to provide information and counseling the couple in order to achieve the best possible outcome in the shortest period of time.
Can you just explain a bit about the AMH test?
Yeah. The AMH test, AMH stands for anti-Mullerian hormone, is a test that has become used in routine clinical practice within IVF settings and fertility clinics, probably in the last decade. It is often used as a surrogate for ovarian reserve, and it is similar, although not the same, to doing a semen analysis in a man. It's a test that is a blood test that will give an accurate reading of the hormone that is tested for, called AMH, or anti-Mullerian hormone. This hormone is produced by the granulosa cells within follicles, and higher is the AMH level, higher will be the number of follicles within the ovaries. Now, having more follicles doesn't mean that that specific patient will have a better fertility or higher chance of pregnancy. Is an indication. And unfortunately, sometimes we see women that have got a very good AMH level but still unable to conceive because might be other problems, for instance, genetic problems, maybe kind of some genetic abnormalities that affect the eggs. So it's a marker, and results become available within 24 hours. Is certainly the most accurate marker that we can use in clinic. In the past, there were a number of issues with the test because it was not automated like it is now. It was very much operator dependent. Longer was left on the bench, probably more. The sample was suffering thermal influences, and as such was going to be not reliable, but now it's not. And is relatively inexpensive for the information that is taken from that test in advance of starting treatment, and can be done any time of the cycle, and can be done also in women taking the pill. It is more patient-friendly than other tests because it's not invasive like a transvaginal ultrasound scan. Is not cycle-dependent like FSH, LH, and estradiol, that are other hormones used for us to assess ovarian function, and is probably the test that is closest to assessing ovarian function compared to all the other tests we currently have in clinic.
So it's a really good indicator, even if you're not necessarily ready to start, to just get checked.
Absolutely.
So that then there's conversations, obviously, if you're thinking of freezing eggs or just having that empowerment of where you're at.
Yeah, I think I agree. However, I always say to my patients, the AMH test will give you information at one point in time. You cannot use the AMH levels today to forecast when you're going to reach the menopause or how many years you got left before your fertility will decline. And if you intend to do so, then probably you need to have that AMH test done every 6-12 months. So you can picture a pattern on what's happening. But I wouldn't say if you have the test done today and the levels come back at 25, which is normal, then you can wait, because no one can give you a guarantee that in 6 months' time the levels will not drop to 6 for whatever reason. But at that point in time, it's a very accurate marker of ovarian function.
Let's bring Jo, you in now, because I want us to talk about the stage at which the stage at which you start to inquire, and you in a relationship with your partner Jane. Did you reach a point and decide, right, we need to now go and do something about this, or was it a conversation that was coming for a while? I mean, yeah. How aware were you of what to do?
Okay. Well, we've been together a couple of years, and it was always in our future that we would try and have a child. That we met, and we were very clear from the start that as a couple we were very, we really wanted to bring a child into the world. So so it was on our agenda. I was getting a bit older, I was sort of 38. Jane's 7 years older than me, so she made it very clear that perhaps it'd be me that would carry, and I was happy with that. That wasn't an issue. I wasn't being forced into doing anything, but it just seemed like that I might have the healthier eggs, you know, and I felt a bit, yeah, I am. I'm in my 30s. This is good, and yeah, naively, I honestly thought. Obviously, there was a barrier to us having a child in that we're a same-sex couple, but I did honestly think and naively thought that there wouldn't be any fertility barrier. I just thought, I'm in my 30s, I'm healthy, I'm doing half marathons, you know, I eat well and this, that and the other. And just thought, and I think a sense in the community as well, in the gay community, was that you know, it's a really unhelpful joke about the turkey baster, because you think, well, if somebody's using a turkey baster to do it and that's successful, then, you know, if you've got the funds to go to a private clinic, then it's definitely going to happen, you know. So yeah, it took me by surprise when I found out that, you know, my fertility was low. So we decided that we wanted to go ahead with it. I did some investigating. There was an open day on at a fertility clinic, so we thought we'd take ourselves off there in no real rush, but, you know, just to find out what we needed to do to get ready for this journey. And we got to this open evening, heard more about the process and what the options were for us. And at the end of that, they offered me a test, the blood test, the AMH test, and horrified to discover that low fertility, and thought, oh shit, what are we going to do? So that expedited things for us. It made it really clear that we needed to start now. At that point, not literally there, we left, and we left the clinic. I didn't just admit myself and refuse to leave, but yeah, we knew that we had to move on it. So that's what we did.
Do you want to say what happened next? As in the next process of...
Yeah, so we went with the clinic that we'd been to for the open evening, and yeah, we had a year and a half, 2 years of just devastation, really, because we really had our hearts set on having a child, and it just didn't work for us. We self-funded. We spent a lot of our savings on going for private treatment. This was the treatment was the sort of assisted insemination, so it wasn't IVF, but IUI, yeah. And then we introduced some other things that might help, you know, stimulate my follicles and produce more eggs and stuff. So some drugs alongside that, and, you know, just 6 times just it didn't work. And then we're a bit lost because we kind of run out of cash. We were about to move house and emotionally drained, completely drained. And I went to see my GP because, we both went to see our GP, just to explain that this wasn't working for us, and also just talk about my mental health and stuff, and Jane's, because we were both very disappointed about it all. And she said, well, I'll explore, see if we could get you any support. I had no idea that we could potentially get some funded support from the NHS. Our GP was amazing. Went to see her on the Friday. On the Sunday, she took it upon herself to go through the CCG, the Clinical Commissioning Group, who makes decisions on these things, and to see what the kind of eligibility was for a couple like us to access some funded support, and came back to say that, weirdly, and just very fortuitously for us, was that our particular area, because we'd self-funded 6 goes, we were eligible for some funded support. So she put an application forward and it got accepted, and we were gifted and funded for two goes at IVF. Yes, the result was that, yes, sorry, no, just keep hanging on. No, we went to another clinic through the IVF process, and we were very lucky that on our first IVF journey, 1 egg survived and became our little boy Freddie, who's now 4.
But Luciano, if I can just have you explain about the trying 6 times, it's normally 6 times the IUI to then be, as a same-sex couple, to then be eligible for funding. Can you explain a bit about that?
Well, the reason for it, is that there is some evidence, although very weak, showing that if you have tried 6 times with IUI, proceeding with IUI is not going to increase your chances of success, because there might be other reasons why IUI is not successful.
Because 6 times is meant to be, if you're a heterosexual couple, that would be the kind of over a year amount of times you.
Well, hopefully it's more than 6 times in 12 months, but but yes, I think that there's no you cannot compare trying to conceive naturally with IUI, because when you're trying to conceive naturally, you will be having unprotected sexual intercourse more than once a month. Well, you hope so. Otherwise, obviously, there will be a need for something else, not just IUI. So, in that specific circumstance, when you have an IUI cycle, you're going to inject washed sperm inside the uterine cavity. So you expect to be better sperm. You expect for the sperm to swim less because it's already halfway down the path. But the studies in the literature, most which actually come from outside the UK, have demonstrated that 6 cycles of IUI will provide a couple with a chance of over 50% of conception, which on balance of probability is higher than if you don't conceive. So if you haven't conceived within 6 inseminations, then performing IVF might be a better option for 2 reasons. One, because you're going to create embryos and see whether perhaps there is a problem with either the sperm or the eggs at the time of you creating embryos. 2 is because you're going to assess the eggs that you will not be able to assess otherwise in an IUI cycle. And irrespective of AMH levels being high or low, every week in clinic you have patients coming having other IUI cycles and not being successful, and then only finding out that in an IVF cycle they don't respond as well as they expected or we expected. So I think if you haven't conceived with IUI, IVF is going to have a dual role. One, shorten the time to pregnancy, and the other one, further investigating the eggs, but also the embryos.
Okay. Yeah, bring it up. Sorry, that's okay.
So I come to this from a slightly different angle, because I used to manage a clinic's relationship with the commissioning groups who would fund those, so make those decisions. And I suppose my understanding was perhaps a bit more simplistic than Luciano's, in that I always assumed that the CCGs and some of their criteria do seem a little arbitrary. You know, the idea was that if you've had 6 goes with IUI, you've kind of, if you like, got some evidence that there might be an underlying fertility problem, and that's when they are obliged to provide fertility treatment. But the one thing I would say from my interaction with couples is I would encourage you to know that there is a possibility of NHS funding, but also to push back a little. I've certainly met with couples where I've had couples where we've got 2 women having treatment together, and GPs can sometimes be a little flippant and say things like, well, why can't your partner just produce the eggs? You know, there's questions, and I would encourage anyone to push back. It's really hard because you're sitting in front of a healthcare professional, but you have to remember they may have their own prejudices or beliefs about, or values about what should be funded through the NHS. But, you know, fight your case, fight your corner. If you've been refused and if you've had fertility issues, particularly, I mean, the same could be true of none of the CCGs that in Manchester, as far as I'm aware, fund any surrogacy whatsoever. And I think that's quite shocking when you think about the options for the trans community as well as men.
I know of one
particularly
in Sussex
fertility.
that is just starting to.
Certainly none of the Manchester commissioning groups that we work with in care, and I wouldn't mind betting that your experience, Luciano, they don't fund surrogacy. I think it's something it just is, you know, I have no influence over that as a provider, but it is something that's important. And I would definitely urge you to push back. if there's a possibility of getting funding.
Keep the mic, because what I'd like to talk with you, Deborah, is a bit about shared motherhood. Jo talks about that kind of assumption that she was going to be the one that was in the better place, and then obviously that situation changed. Am I right, Jo, in saying that ultimately it was your eggs that you used? Yeah, and we're going to talk a bit more about choosing a sperm donor and that whole process, but can you just explain a bit about shared motherhood if women come and they're both interested in being involved?
I think it's pretty straightforward, and I'd reiterate what Luciano said. If you're coming to a clinic, everybody who sets foot through the door of a fertility clinic feels nervous. In my experience, from the open evenings I've done with patients, you almost see that fear as people come over the threshold. Please don't be. I would say any clinic, we've got a fantastic range of clinics in Manchester, haven't you? You're a bit blessed in Manchester. You've got some really excellent clinics. You've got lots of choices. And I would argue that of the people I know in those clinics, you're going to be welcomed. So don't be afraid. People are not going to be making prejudiced judgments. Walk through that door, take that step, get all the information you can. But I think when it comes to, I would say keep an open mind about who's going to provide the eggs and who's going to carry the child. But certainly a lot will be influenced by the test results that Luciano's spoken about, and age sadly is a factor. It doesn't matter how well we look after ourselves, how many marathons we run. Sadly, a woman is born with all the eggs she'll ever have. By the time she reaches age 35, inevitably her fertility will start to decline. So come through the door, keep an open mind about who's going to do what, have the tests like any clinic would do, but then the joy, I think, for shared motherhood is it gives an opportunity for both women to participate in the experience, if you like. So what in Manchester, in care, shared motherhood is where one woman provides the eggs in an IVF arrangement. The eggs are fertilized in the lab and then transferred to her partner. And quite often we find that in that scenario, if they're successful, quite often they'll reverse that and they'll come back, and the woman who didn't have the embryo transfer in the first round of the treatment cycle will come back and have an embryo replacement. And I suppose it gives women an opportunity for both to have a role in that pregnancy.
I'm going to bring Rosie in, who is our resident fertility nutritionist, just to talk a little bit about how ready you can be, man or woman, fertility fit, whether you want to focus on your sperm health or your egg health, because ultimately we can do more than we realise, can't we, Rosie, with our nutrition?
Yeah, definitely.
So top tips to be pregnancy ready if you're going down a surrogacy route and it's the sperm, you found your donor, your egg donor, and you've got to give that sample, or if it's your egg health, what can you do, and time frame that you need to be thinking about it to really try and get the best chance?
Yeah, so the first thing I would say is fitness and health are different. So say when you're saying, marathon fit, like in actual fact, running kind of marathons as an example, or doing triathlons, actually cause a lot of oxidative stress and cortisol in your body. So if you do want to conceive, it isn't necessarily the best source of exercise. Say for instance, like long distance cycling, we know that has an impact on sperm health if you're doing it regularly. So kind of like cycling, I know some of my male clients are like, but I cycle to work and it takes me 15 minutes. Is that all right? I'm like, I think you'll be fine. We're talking... Yeah, maybe take the Lycra off when you get to work, but you'll be fine. So yeah, that's the first thing I'd say. So the next thing I'd say is 3 months is your time scale for kind of maturing eggs and kind of seeing a change in the egg quality. Like Luciano was saying, where AMH is a measure of amounts of eggs, but it's not a measure of egg quality. So I suppose being mindful that you've got that 3 month window to really optimize your egg quality. And also sperm is completely different sperm in 3 months. That sperm turnover changes as well. So one of the things that really makes me sad, and I'm like, oh, I wish you'd come to me earlier, is when I get calls from potential clients, whether it's same-sex couples or not, and they say, oh, I'm going to start IVF next week. can you help me? And I'm like, no. No, like there would be no point me kind of taking your money at this point. Like you need that 3-month run up. So that'd be the next thing. Then in terms of practical things that you can change, from really basic things to improve both sperm health and egg health. First one, really basic one, is eat your veggies, eat your fruit. I mean, it's not revolutionary advice, is it? But it's very studied, and we know across the board that it's. So caffeine, I would say, comes down to the amount and also the person. So in terms of how individuals metabolize caffeine is very dependent on their own individual liver. So I'd say if you need that caffeine to keep you going, then it's tipping you into that state of cortisol and stress, and that's not going to be good for your egg quality. If you just love a cappuccino on a Saturday with your friend and it's kind of part of a ritual and you don't rely on it, crack on. Alcohol, I would say it comes down to the amount and also type to a certain degree. So say for like male sperm, we know in beer, in hops, there's certain compounds that look very similar to estrogen. So isn't that beneficial for sperm health? So I'd say like a couple of glasses of wine throughout the week, if you're someone that can tolerate it, isn't going to affect either egg or sperm health. But binge drinking, again, is kind of one of even the NHS says that's not good for fertility, and if they're saying it, it must be true.
Thank you, Rosie. Let's talk about the process of choosing a sperm donor, the legalities. Do you want to pass it to Jo? And Luciana, I wanted to get the kind of input as well, the study that goes alongside these decisions that are being made. So that process, Jo, choosing a donor, you've obviously got some kind of tick boxes. Was it easy? Did you feel supported by your clinic?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, when we started off with one clinic and we went through the IUI, we used to get, when we were looking for a sperm donor, we got reams and reams and reams of paper and essays off donors, and it was like a bit off-putting actually. She's like, it's really bad grammar, or or you're just telling us too much. We're not going to not marrying you, and just need your sperm, please. So that was that, but that was fine, and we did pick a donor through that process. But then the second clinic, it was less, but less was more. I think all we wanted to know was it's difficult because Jane and I look very different. So she's very blonde and she's got blue eyes, and I've got dark hair. I've got dark eyes. So characteristics wise, it was just like, just whatever, just. But then it's about whether you feel where you are on the spectrum of nature and nurture and all of that. It's all about that. For us, we just knew that we were going to bring up this child in a loving environment and that he would be ours, and that was it really. I think one of the good things about choosing a donor through our fertility clinic at the time was that we knew that when our child, if we were lucky enough to have a child at 18, they have a choice and an ability to contact that person, which was reassuring to us. It might not be to everybody. It's just that we had friends that have had children through donor sperm that can remain anonymous. This was years ago when they'd had them, and the child becomes very curious, and because they can't access it, it becomes more of an issue and more of a thing that they want. And I reflect back on my childhood, and if I'm told I can't have something, or it becomes more of a challenge, doesn't it? Whereas if you've got a choice there, we did feel that would help, and we were happy with that.
Can you talk, Luciana, about the support?
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think some of the issues you highlighted normally are resolved with support and implication counselling, which should, in most cases, precede the time when you end up choosing the sperm donor. There are different steps. So once you have determined the fact if the couple is undergoing, because this applies to single women as well as to gay couples, and obviously heterosexual couples that need donor sperm. First of all, it's important to decide whether they're going to use donor sperm for IVF or IUI. And the information that is provided by the clinic is to help the couple to choose the sperm that is most appropriate for the treatment they've been advised to have. Once it's been decided whether it's going to be an IVF or IUI, then providing support and implication counseling helps to make the best decision and not being confronted with all the questions and the decisions and the profiles and the various aspects of choosing the sperm donor. Once the couple has made a decision, I think that decision is a couple's decision, so it's not influenced by me if they're going to choose a specific sperm donor. But it is important they understand the implications of choosing a specific donor in relation to how many pregnancies have been created, in relation to if used within the clinic, you got any information about success rate in terms of fertilization, embryo quality, and also how much sperm is left if they were going to embark on repeated cycles, or if that cycle results in a positive outcome and they wanted to have a sibling later on in life. And this is, to me, a very important aspect of counseling and clinical decision-making that happens before embarking on treatment. I have seen in my career couples, irrespective of being same-sex or heterosexual, having used donor sperm and then coming back and wanting to have another cycle of treatment and having to accept that that donor is no longer available, which is not perhaps something that is ideal. And sometimes they didn't appreciate that at the time of the first appointment, as Deborah said, because of the fears of asking questions, because of the excitement perhaps, and because the huge amount of information they're presented with. So I think today, because of a number of organizations like yours, and because information being available, easily available online, and because of support groups, I think our patient population is far more educated and switched on than it was 10 years ago, 5 years ago, even perhaps 3 years ago. But there are not many clinical aspects to discuss with the couple seeking the use of donor sperm, except deciding whether it's going to be the A partner, the other partner, being inseminated or having IVF. But there are significant implications and support aspect that the clinic has to provide the patient with.
We're going to talk a bit about the legal side, but before we do that, questions?
Yeah. So someone said, what testing does the sperm have? What genetics?
So the sperm donors, they undergo number of tests. Now, not in some sperm banks will be testing the donor sperm for a number of genetic tests as well. But it is very much dependent on where the sperm is purchased from. It is my preference to know that the couple coming to the clinic has got as much information as possible with regard to the genetic aspect of the sperm donor.
I think it's a really interesting question, and I wouldn't want to ever scare them, because I think we have to broaden this out to recognise that patients, so I'm thinking about patients, but people may choose to have treatment outside a licensed fertility clinic like ours. So the genetic screening, common genetic conditions, so say for example cystic fibrosis, generally all sperm donors will be screened for quite a common condition. You've probably all heard of cystic fibrosis. Depending on someone's ethnicity, they'll be screened for something like sickle cell disease or thalassemia. These are all conditions we're kind of familiar with in the community. There's there's quite extensive screening for infectious conditions. So all donors, egg or sperm, will be screened for HIV and hepatitis B and C. Because there's a bit of a resurgence of hepatitis A in men who have sex with men. We now screen sperm donors for hepatitis A if they come from that community. And So the basic infectious screening is all done. Chlamydia, gonorrhea, syphilis, all donors, egg and sperm will all be screened for those things. As Luciano says, increasingly, actually, it's quite hard to get hold of enough donor sperm to satisfy the demand, which is quite high. So clinics like ours often import sperm. And I know that a lot of the American sperm banks do something called extended carrier screening. So they might look at a big panel of sort of 250 common genes. But I think what's important is, as Luciano says, is to ask questions about what your chosen donor has been screened for. But also, there is a context here. You know, some of us randomly meet some bloke and decide to have his children. You know, we don't get each other genetically screened. We kind of take that risk, don't we? We know a bit about their families, all the rest of it. Actually, I would say if you're lucky enough to be choosing a donor, egg or sperm, you have the opportunity to think, okay, what are the characteristics I might like, physical characteristics, and then you may have the opportunity to look at this extended carrier screening. But it's everyone is different. You talked about less is more with the pen portraits. I worked for the regulator when there was a huge push to get people this pen portrait information. So this is like a little blurb that a donor will do that tells you about what they like, what they're good at, what their hopes and dreams and aspirations are for their children. But actually, you know, quite often, many of us, when we're writing things like that, there might be grammatical mistakes. You might think, ooh, not sure about this. I had a beautiful story once about a couple who were choosing between two donors, and one donor seemed like a really high flyer, you know, lots of qualifications and all this, you know, aspirations for the future. And the other donor was a fisherman. And the couple decided they wanted a child who had the patience to be a fisherman, and they'd chosen this particular donor. So every one of you will be different. We're all different. We want different amount of information, and that extends to the pen portrait, where donors tell you a bit about themselves, but also the screening. And if you think, well, actually, this donor's been screened for these common conditions, they have no conditions that are frequent in the population, so I'm going to take my risk. You know, if my risk is 1 in 3 or 400 of having a child with a serious genetic condition, that's better than if we'd had no screening. I'm happy to accept it. Others actually could go to the lengths of getting themselves tested to be matched gene by gene to a donor. So your opportunities depend entirely on you and what your appetite, if you like, for risk and what you understand. So ask all the questions you want. There's a whole range out there. You can take your chances, much as anyone would have no screening who didn't have fertility treatment would usually do. Or you can go the whole 9 yards and get yourself tested and matched to the donor. Quite a few donor banks do that sort of thing. So they'll screen the donor. Every single one of us in the room probably carries 4 or 5 mutations in our genes which do us no harm whatsoever, because we have one normal gene and one probably not quite functioning properly gene. But if you were to meet that one person or choose that one donor that carried the same gene that you carried that wasn't quite functioning properly, there would be a 1 in 4 chance of that child having a serious illness, just like we see with cystic fibrosis. But every one of us will have a different threshold for where we put our risks, and it depends where you are on that spectrum. So just ask tons of questions and be aware you can do lots to mitigate your risk of having a child with a genetic illness, or you can actually think to yourself, you know, I run the same risk that anyone who conceives naturally.
I'm going to send out with the webinar info a podcast I did about unregulated sperm donation websites, and also another conversation I did with the European Sperm Bank about some of the genetic testing that they do. So we'll make sure that you've got all that information. We're just going to show you a little bit of a video, because we were hoping to have these two, who are Mike and Wes, who are 2 dads online, and they are flying the flag for surrogacy in the UK, and they were going to send a video, and basically they've just had their second baby through surrogacy. This is a little snippet because it's a 7-minute video, and I'm not going to make you sit through it. This is Mike and Wes just explaining a bit about what they do. If you're thinking about surrogacy and you want to understand more about it, these two, and the details will be at the end, these two are amazing in what they're doing to raise awareness of the options available. If it works like I want to. Right, that's not going to work. Right. We'll take the video after. But Mike and Wes, basically, that's Tallulah. So Wes already had a child from a heterosexual relationship, and then the pair of them got together and they had Tallulah through a surrogate, and up in Manchester actually, they had their treatment up here. And then they have just, with the same surrogates, completed their family. They've had a sibling project. It was a sibling project, and they've just had a little boy literally arrived like 2 weeks ago. So again, we'll share the information from them. What I want to do then, Deborah, is just come back to a bit more about the legal elements and the parental consent when it comes to, and I know, Joe, it's something that you had an interesting experience with. So can you explain more about what people need to do about registering with the HFEA and also legal parenthood consent?
Okay. So
in a nutshell.
What?
No.
Yeah. What?
And this is an overwhelming topic to a point, isn't it? So it's just some pointers, and you can ask more questions, and we'll signpost you to all people that can help. It's just things to think about.
I think the amazing thing is that the law was changed and it allows same-sex couples to both be registered as a child's legal parent. So if you're a same-sex female couple, then you can have it's important to remember the woman who gives birth to the child is always the legal parent, even if her partner provided the eggs. The woman who gives birth, always the legal parent. If she consents to it, then her partner can be named on the birth certificate as a child's second parent. In surrogacy, it's a bit more complicated because the surrogate is always the birth mother. But if she is not married, and I won't go into the details as to why, but this is just the law, this isn't local clinics practice. If the surrogate's not married, she can nominate one of the sperm providers to be the child's legal parent on the birth certificate from the outset. That's before you'd be applying for a parental order. I don't really have any information on how that impacts on the ability to get a parental order, but it does mean right from the outset in a surrogacy arrangement, if the surrogate's not married, then the person providing the sperm will be the legal parent of the child. Having a child having a second parent only works if you've had treatment in a licensed fertility clinic. It's just the law. It's because the law sets out very clearly that if a donor, a sperm donor, registers with the HFEA, they will not be the father of a child. So if there is no father of the child, because it was a sperm donor, then you can do these consents to legal parenthood. So you have to do it in a clinic, and you have to make sure that right from the outset, the clinic knows that it's your intention. So an example of something that I'm aware of happening, sometimes a single woman might come through for treatment, perhaps as treatment progresses or as her pregnancy progresses, if she meets someone and wants to have them named as a legal second parent, she can't. It all has to be done before the insemination or the embryo transfer. You can't sign these forms without, you can't sign them afterwards. They can't be done retrospectively. And that's caused clinics like ours many problems in the last few years. But it's a brilliant thing. If you want it to be done, make sure I'm afraid you'll have to do it through a licensed clinic.
Can we talk a little bit, I don't want to put you on the spot, but can we talk a little bit about costs?
Yeah.
Starting point, because obviously everybody, it's bespoke treatment depending on what you need. But if you're thinking, oh my goodness, where do we start? Like initial fertility MOT, and then maybe an idea, and obviously it depends on the different clinics. But
of course.
just to get
I think absolutely depends on different clinics, but I think the cost of fertility tests and fertility treatment are very, very similar amongst clinics in the UK. The cost of a first consultation is in the order of £200. And the MOT, which in the case of a woman will be an AMH test and the scan, probably together will be between 250 and 300 pounds. It very much depends then on the clinic preference and protocols. In our clinic, all patients opting to use donor sperm and insemination cycles, we would recommend to have a tubal patency test to ensure that before they purchase sperm for the use of sperm and IUI, they have got patent tubes, especially if they've never been pregnant before, because 10% of female population have a tubal factor. Fallopian tubes being potentially damaged. And the cost of a tubal patency test, what we do in our clinic, most clinics in the UK nowadays, is a high costly test, which is an ultrasound-based dynamic test to assess tubal patency. The cost is £400, £450, but if done as part of the initial diagnostic test, then you will be saving on the cost of the scan. Because you need to have 2 scans, one to check your uterus and ovaries, and the other one to check the fallopian tubes can be done at the same time. I think the cost then will become an issue after all the investigations have been done. And the second step will be the cost for the screening test, what Deborah was talking about, hepatitis B, hepatitis C, HIV, rubella, chlamydia, and the standard screening test before treatment. And that the standard test will be in the order of £200. And then depending on the treatment, an IUI cycle using donor sperm, excluding the cost of the sperm, will probably be in the range between £750 and £1,000 in most clinics in the UK. Whereas an IVF cycle will be between £3,000 and £3,500 in most clinics in the UK.
As a starting point?
Yeah. As a starting point, yeah.
£3,500.
Yeah. For IVF, yeah.
Yeah. You can hand over to Joe. And please do shout out if there's any questions, because we're going to open up questions in a moment. Tips, Joe, as far as your experience, because I know, because Joe and I, Joe was a guest on my podcast, and I'll share that full conversation. I know that you experienced, Deborah was talking about maybe the relationship with your GP because of maybe their prejudices, and I know that you experienced, as you said to me, you had to pretty much come out at every conversation.
Yeah.
Do you want to talk a little bit about that experience and maybe some of your now learned wisdom from your experience to anybody who's thinking of going down this route?
I think this is a really important conversation. I wish I'd have listened to this before I'd have embarked on the journey, because I've, you learn so much from the experience, but actually I would have asked more questions in clinic if I'd have known what questions I needed to be asking. It's difficult you don't know what you don't know, and you go into it with very much, it's very emotional. So yeah, that's writing things down, basic things like that. Don't just walk into an appointment. Yeah, don't walk into an appointment without writing something down. You've got to, once you're in that environment, it's very quickly get taken away with the whole clinical and sense of it. Yeah, so write stuff down, reflect on it, and have your list before you go in. Yes, so there's that. I thought the clinics were fantastic. I thought they got us. I felt no prejudice, no nothing. Same with the GP, actually. Our GP was very good. But what I found was when we ended up being pregnant and going into sort of the hospital environment, midwives and things, and appointments, they just didn't read our notes. So on your green notes, it says at the bottom whether you've got a partner or not and what that partner's called, and they just never read it. So I'd walk in with Jane and they'd assume she'd either be a friend, and in one situation they thought she was my mother, which was horrifying for us both. But it was just really lazy, and I just don't know. I just thought, really, please? And there's just there's this assumption that I was either coming in with a friend or, it's just really weird. And then I felt really vulnerable. Every time I walked into one of those appointments, I'd feel I'd literally walk in and go, hi, this is my partner Jane. And, shout it at people, and then they'd be horrified and think, God, she's crazy. But yeah, just that was a bit. And so, and NCT, went to NCT, and that was a bit awkward. The first NCT, the National Childbirth thing, and it was all heterosexual couples, and all the reference points and the kind of paperwork and the diagrams and stuff. It was all around mummies and daddies, and there was nothing there around just parents. So at one point there was this really lame kind of thing that they had to do about teaching me what to do to loosen something down there, and they took Jane off with the guys, and I was like, you know, it's just really, and they had to talk about how things were going to change for them when the child was born. It's like, come on. Yeah, and they were like, oh, I won't be able to have a beer and stuff, and I'm being really stereotypical, but that's that kind of the way it went. And Jane was like, oh God, it's really weird. So that was interesting.
The hardest thing that you had to overcome, would you say? I mean, I will say this is the podcast, because there was an issue that I don't think we've got time to probably go into.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, I think just we had a good experience. I thought the clinics were great. You know.
I reckon you could listen to Joe's podcast.
Yeah, and yeah, we did have, you know, there's mess up on paperwork. We aren't married, Jane and I, so there wasn't this automatic thing where Jane became a legal parent. So that all messed up, but that's a different story. But that's a podcast, yeah. But yeah, I think on the whole, I think it's just you know, having that time to reflect before you go into things, and writing things down, because you can get very quickly taken on this emotional journey, and you don't ask the right questions sometimes, or you yeah, so that'd be mine.
Luciano, final pieces of advice for people thinking about walking into your clinic to embark on starting their family, man or woman, in a relationship, or doing it on their own. What would you say?
I think to be absolutely certain that that's what they want to do, and be sure that they are, you know, mentally, physically, emotionally ready to start the journey, because there is no guarantee that it is successful. And you are very lucky being successful in your first attempt, but with IVF. But one of the reasons why some couples will never achieve a pregnancy is because they're not, you know, persevering long enough. Hence why better prepared and better manage their expectations, and more likely is to achieve the successful outcome before they end the journey.
And I know your clinic puts a big emphasis on support from the outset, be it counselling or coaching or nutritional support, and having all of that initially, not once you've started. Like,
then it will be too late.
Being proactive.
I think making sure that physically and emotionally you're prepared to embark on treatment is of paramount importance, and that being from fertility, coaching, nutrition, counselling is certainly important.
Thank you. Rosie, final words of wisdom.
Mine would just be, if you do think you may be interested in nutrition, just that 3-month window. Don't leave it until the last minute.
And it's like preparing to prepare is preparing to prepare.
Oh, look at this little motto.
And Deborah, final word. Let me just take that hair off the microphone. Final tips.
I think I'd say be really brave. Ask any questions you want to. Don't hold back.
Stupid questions.
There are genuinely no stupid questions, and it's absolutely vital that you get to ask anything you want. And I would also say, you know, thinking about Joe's experience, some of us have been there. We know what it's like. I know what it's been like on the other side of that. And I would also say that if your experience isn't good, tell the clinic, because we should always listen to you. And I absolutely mean what I said in my biog, that there is, every single one of us has an opportunity to improve. So if you think, particularly I was thinking, you mentioned about sometimes the forms and the paperwork is badly worded. If you get a piece of paper that refers to a mother or a father when it should be a parent or a second parent, wave it in our faces, make us change, because we ought to, we try really hard, but if we can do better, don't stand for that sort of experience. Your experience should be the best for you personally, depending on your circumstances. And we're a bit behind the curve, some of us, and sometimes our information can be badly worded. And if you experience that in our clinic, I would definitely want to know about it. Unless counselling, I am a scientist by trade. I'm a real data nerd. And if you said to me, Deb, would you like some counselling? I'd be thinking, no, I really wouldn't. But I know fertility counsellors that you get in clinics are experts, and they will know things that Luciano and I never think of, or any of us would think of. None of us in this room would think, oh, I haven't thought about how I'll feel. So use the fertility counsellors. You'll almost certainly, if you go for treatment, be compelled to see a counsellor. Try not to resent it. Know that the reason the clinic's doing it is because those people are experts at knowing all the things you never thought to ask. And there's also, when you talk about asking questions in advance, there is a fertility regulator, the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority, and they have got information on their website that will tell you about the sorts of questions you should ask.
I will also just add, in that getting support, there is an amazing community on Instagram and on social media in general, which again, we will be sharing. We've given you some information there about some of the areas that you can reach out to get more information and support. If you're into your social platforms and want to know, again, we can put some information in the email that we send out afterwards. But if you just search with any of the hashtags TTC, infertility, IVF, TTC community, it's huge. And whilst we're all for expert advice, there is something about that peer support and advice as well to help answer your questions. Do we have any more questions?
If money is a barrier to getting treatment in the clinic, what is your view on if you have a known donor doing something at home?
There is something to think about. So, as I mentioned, legal parenthood, because of the way the law is drafted, the woman giving birth to the child is always the legal parent. So an egg donor, you couldn't have an egg donor without going through fertility treatment, but obviously you could have a sperm donor. The problem arises then is that that person will technically be the legal parent of the child, with all that brings. And we often think, does that mean, I've had a couple say, well, I'm not going to seek support from them for the upbringing of this child. Actually, it's not about just that, is it? What if that person decides as a legal parent, actually, I quite would like to see this child, that I want to be part of this child's life. A child inherits their nationality from both of their parents, these sorts of things. So it's complicated. There's issues to do with screening, of course, but I'm sure, I'm reluctant to say it, but I'm sure there are ways of getting reassurance that the person who's providing the sperm doesn't carry an infection. I'm sure there's lots of organisations that help you rule that out. But I think for me, around the parenthood, that's possibly one of the risks.
Thank you. So thank you, everybody. Let's just have a quick round of applause for our panel. Thank you to our webinar attendees. Our next event is the 30th of October, which is basically all about fertility planning, whatever stage you're at. So we're talking about fertility MOTs, about egg freezing, about solo motherhood, which Mel, our resident coach and expert in all things solo motherhood, will be talking about her experiences. So we'll be sending the details of how you can register and find out more. And thank you for joining us. Thank you, everybody.